Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. For this video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild class supplement Bard College of Percussion by Chad M. Lensch for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons, Andrew, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick, Andy, Grayson, and Chris. And gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy Numa, Marcos, David, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, A.K., Cert 2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, Sam, Rosh, and Lumpy Spuds. Thank you all very much for your support. So, fun fact, I was a band nerd in middle school and high school, which means I did it for 7 years of my very formative teenage years. It's where I met my wife. That old love story. He played trombone, she played French horn. Go brass or go home. The percussion players were always a different breed. So obviously, band nerds are already a clique in high school of their own, and then within that sub realm of social order, we also divide ourselves up with woodwinds, brass, and percussion. And percussion, they get their own teacher. They have a lot of their own meetings. Obviously, without the percussion, there is no marching band. So they're definitely probably the most important element, but we can never tell them that. So I have a lot of respect for percussion players. They can be very, very eccentric and fun lot. And apparently Chad definitely has that background in the foreword he mentions, which talks a lot about his faith and his livelihood and background being a percussion player, a drummer. And I think usually forewords are supposed to be written usually by other people, maybe, but I did appreciate having a little bit of insight into the author and kind of where they're at. So compared to him, my band experience is a flight of fancy because he's been doing it for far longer. But more importantly, he does a really good job with this player class supplement, which is adding 2 new subclasses to bards specifically for drummers. And it is one of the most impressive player class supplements I've seen on the DM's Guild because it's extremely comprehensive and detailed. It's gorgeously laid out. I love the use of art and pictures from actual real-world instruments rather than just using, say, stock art and just the obvious, 1 or 2 bard pictures that are already out there from fantasy. Instead, it's actually real-world pictures of instruments from around the world too, globally, and a lot of instruments that would fit in a medieval fantasy D&D time period. And usually I would have to dig in there to count off and list what all is in here, but thankfully the author has provided that right here. 2 new bard colleges, 3 new backgrounds, 17 instruments, an entire mini dungeon/faction that has to do with percussion, 3 NPCs that obviously are built basically like PCs that using these new subclasses, and then 12 new magical items using musical instruments. So everything in here has to do with the theme. It's a very strong theme. I think it's all very well balanced. It's interesting, and it just utilizes that one concept of a bard who specializes specifically in percussion so damn well. I was really, really impressed with flipping through the pages, it looks gorgeous. There is some kind of picture artwork on every single page. Even just the music sheets are extremely thematic. I love seeing music sheets. This is famous bard percussionist Chult. They have little quotes in here. There's a really funny one that is pretty infamous for percussions about there are 2 types of people in the world. Those who are 2 types of drummers in the world, those who can count and those who can't. That's sorry, I messed it up. There are 3 kinds of drummers in the world, though I can't count either. Those who can count and those who can't, which is definitely a joke that I heard in band told many, many times. So the 2 different subclasses is the pitched percussion bard and the non-pitched percussion bard. That is something you don't want to say 3 times fast, but essentially it is there's a difference in instruments between playing a marimba or a xylophone, which are you wouldn't even consider those. Most people probably wouldn't even consider that in percussion, but it is. If you're hitting something and making a noise, that's basically percussion rather than making it with your mouth. But something like that can make different tones and different pitches, whereas more drum, non-pitched percussion is what you'd think of as drum. So it's just kind of keeping the beat. Now, granted, you can have them sound differently and give off different sounds, but typically that's going to be the difference. One of them is going to have different levels of pitches you can actually create, and the xylophone being the most well-known of that example. So the way that translate is the pitched percussion bard is more about healing and casting spells, whereas the non-pitched percussion or the actual drummer is more about performing different actions with drumming that gives off kind of spell-like effects, which I think it's, again, very thematic. So like drums of battle is you can use your bardic inspiration to move somebody 10 feet, which I think is just a great use of, literally doing marching orders and that kind of thing. Or you can incite fear all around you with your drums of panic or cadence of war. Everybody gets advantage to attack rolls and saving throws and resistances just by using it a certain amount of times. Or no, it's a certain amount of creatures up to your charisma modifier. Whereas the pitched percussion uses your bardic inspiration as spell slots, basically, and turns you into a kind of a mini cleric. So both of those are pretty cool, and they're very different. And it's an example of how you could treat a bard who specializes in drums or cadence beats, some kind of like that, with two completely different methods. I also really like the backgrounds because that further dives into how different drummers' backgrounds could be. A street musician, somebody who's playing on the corner. I picture like Bert from Mary Poppins, that scene where he's got the whole the clapping of the cymbals, and he's got the drums, and his like leg does something. It's the one-man band kind of a thing. And I love that the actual features here are actually built into the rules, because a lot of backgrounds in the player's handbook tend to be very nebulous, kind of maybe role-playing or very specific features, like, you can, have a false identity, or I forget what the specifics are, but a lot of them don't come into play, and people tend to forget, as I do, about backgrounds in general and what they can actually do and what they mean, because it doesn't come up that often, at least in my experience. I do like ones that have a very firm, like, here is the rule, here's the mechanic, and here's the benefit that it can give you. In this case, once per day, you can put on a show, and use your performance check and everything, and then that determines how much gold you can earn based on how well you did that day, because you're just being a street performer. Whereas a military drummer, someone who, probably played an instrument during actual battle lines, would have advantage on charisma checks dealing with maybe other soldiers or military rank officials, which is very much in keeping with that. So you could be part of, whether you were military trained or just part of a battlefield or something. And then you've got a shaman, who is more of the spiritual part of being a musical playing person. In this case, a percussionist, but you can cast the scrying spell without expending a spell slot once per day. Again, I like the way that it's actually like, here is the rule, and not just, you can commune with spirits or something. No, you can cast the scrying spell. That's something that I can remember as a player, be like, oh yeah, I've got this ability given to me by my background. So really good features. They also all have personalities, bonds, flaws, and ideals, which is really cool. I just love to see that. For every player class supplement that gives an interesting theme, I would love to see backgrounds added in there, and this goes really above and beyond with 3 backgrounds, all of them really cool, all of them with very useful features, and all of them with personalities, bonds, flaws, and ideals, which is nice to see. On top of that, so I'm already loving the supplement. On top of that, we get a list of musical instruments, specifically, obviously, percussion instruments, because that's what we're talking about. And this is taken from a lot of real-world percussion instruments that would fit in a fantasy, medieval setting, which is what D&D is. So obviously, we've got them divided by pitched percussion instruments and non-pitched. So basically, drums versus things like xylophones. I do love the author couldn't help themselves but go with the excellent SNL reference to cowbell. The only prescription is more agog bells, which apparently are some kind of cowbell type thing. That would be amazing if your entire bar just fucking wailed on these little cowbell things the whole time. I mean, you can imagine how cool that is. Like, everybody's playing nice lutes and little flutes and things, and this person just walks up just banging on these cowbells, and maybe that starts the drums of war or something. I think that's incredible. And there's a lot of really interesting instruments here. And at the end of the supplement, there are links. I can go ahead and show that to you. For examples for all these instruments. These are actually hyperlinked in the PDF that lead you to giving an example of what these instruments look like and what they sound like because a lot of these things, unless you are, a big nerd about instruments, you probably have no idea what half of these things are. I didn't know what half these things are, and I was in band for a long time because most of these are not, either what am I trying to think of? Like world music and used in like more tribal settings, and you'd see them in like I guess you'd see them more in museums than you would on a stage. What I'm trying to say, these are older things, many of which are still pretty cool and still make really cool instruments, and a lot of folks still use them for that reason because music is cool that way, and a lot of that shit doesn't actually age. But I like that there was a lot of research actually done for this, as well as we were given a lot of pictures for them. So that is really cool, and really helps motivate a person who is interested in this, that would just think of, a little drummer boy walking around with a snare drum, hitting that as they're like, okay, well, what is a bard of percussion? I guess you just walk around with this one drum. Like, no, there's actually a ton of things you can use out there. You're probably not wheeling out a whole marimba. Maybe you are. That'd be pretty funny. Just wheeling it along, doodling. Cymbals, you could crash your cymbals together. Like, there's so many different options, and I think that's really, really cool. And it goes really well with the Magic musical instruments, which I'm going to skip ahead to. I absolutely love the way these are used. I wrote down some notes. There are drum mallets that can transform into maces. Those are the mallets of Grumpsch. There is a drum inhabited by a gnome spirit. There is a pan flute, Pan of the Void, that has a bunch of spells, which is typical of what a lot of the musical instruments in the Dungeon Master's Guide is. They just have a bunch of spells in there, which not all bards are super spellcastery, so I'm glad this one does something else. But the ones that do, this one has a curse, for example, that imposes short-term madness on yourself, so there's a little bit of a curse, which I do really love musical instruments that have a, here's this, but then there's this kind of effect with it, so it's more of a risk-reward element. There's Sherwin's Treachery. Is this the one that has the thing that follows you? Yeah, the Revenant, which is really cool. It's a musical instrument that if you use it, then it ups your charisma score. This Revenant just follows you around like fucking It Follows, which is amazing, and can just attack you every once in a while. And of course, very hard to die because Revenants can come back. What a cool freaking curse that is. Like, yeah, this is cool, but this is also going to be an ongoing like side quest element you're going to have to deal with if you want to actually use this thing, which is really cool. The symbols of the Lost Hero are just symbols that you can use as shield, so they each add +2 AC, and you can throw them Captain America style. So automatically, if you're like me, you're thinking, okay, here's going to be my hero concept. I'm just going to be Captain America with symbols bashing together and then throwing those symbols around. That's awesome. I love it. I love musical instruments that just light me up like that in terms of the picturing how well they work and how exciting they would be for a player to find. So I think that's really cool. I love all these musical instruments. On top of all that, we also get a mini dungeon and a new faction, which is, of course, tied to the theme of percussion. It is a kobold. I'll just say that sentence here. The Seekers of Kurtulmark, also called the Seekers, are a highly motivated and slightly peculiar cohort of kobold warriors, musicians, and engineers. They are currently living out in this giant egg, which they have been digging around and excavating, thinking that their god is somewhere. And basically all these beats and drums that they're using is kind of drawing the player's attention, or drawing whatever quest giver gave you the quest to go down into this nice little mini dungeon to then talk to these guys. And it's not even a true dungeon so much as these guys are their own faction, complete with their own renown and their own quests based on what tier 1 level the players are, which could be, you need to help us fight these monsters, to just go bring us some shovels and so we can dig deeper. I don't think I've ever seen a quest actually designed that way, where it actually scales depending on what level the players are. So that's a really cool idea. It's not a full-fledged adventure or mission at all, but this is a player class supplement, not an adventure product. So just the fact that we get anything is completely extra, and I'm awarding massive points for that. But I also think it's a really cool story hook idea, which is really all it's trying to do. It's trying to say, hey, here's an example of, an NPC situation or faction or event that uses these percussion instruments. In this case, it's a leader who is the drummer of Kurtulmark, is the high-ranking. In fact, he's actually given his own NPC stat block, which is Rubblemuck, which goes into my next great element of this supplement, is that we have 4. Is it 4? I think it's 4 new NPCs, which are NPC is probably a misnomer because these are actually really PCs that you could use as a DM to whatever else, but they are literally built like player characters in terms of all the abilities and stats, which means they're probably way overpowered. And one of them is the Kobold leader, but they're all built like as if they took the Bard College of Percussion, at least for part of their leveling, which is pretty cool. So that's it. It serves as an example to what that kind of character can look like, as well as you could use these characters, obviously, if you wanted to, for the DM. And this, again, goes well above and beyond because most player class supplements are going to be used by players, obviously. So it's very impressive to see things for the DM specifically in a player class supplement, if that makes sense, because a player is not going to care about having extra NPC, or maybe that could be part of your background information. Maybe you could tie that in as a player, like, oh, hey, I trained under, Zilgiaz, which is a fucking octopus who plays drums. I love it. The only thing I don't love is that there's no explanation about why this is an octopus that plays drums. It's like that's not a thing. It's just like occasionally it just says that despite her strange appearance, she's able to win over the cooperation of strangers and fearsome enemies alike. Okay, I would think that having an octopus that can play drums is more than a strange appearance, but I don't live in the D&D world, so maybe that is just kind of a slightly weird irregularity. But apparently that is a full-on character that has been created here, and she is a blue-ringed octopod, which is, I think, uses another supplement that is linked at the back of this supplement as well, which is the octopod race. So that's fantastic. I love the idea of an octopus being able to play the drums. 4 tentacles could probably get you pretty far with drumming, which is really cool. So there's a lot going on. It's very well produced. I absolutely love it. I love the art. I love the layout. I love all the magic musical instruments. It gives so much. There's so much detail. I mean, this is a 30. It's a 30-page player class supplement. I think the last supplement I reviewed was literally 5 pages. And I liked that one because it just gave me what I needed, which was, the new player class, and then detailed all those specific abilities. This one goes way above and beyond that by providing so many extra elements that I can't help but absolutely fall in love with it. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for the Bard College of Percussion. Pros: beautiful layout with real-world instrument pictures and music sheets. Very, very impressive because a lot of DM's Guild products tend to use, stock art or just decent fantasy art, something along those lines. This one could have easily gone down that path, but instead actually uses instruments, which I think is really cool and in keeping with the theme. And you could tell it's a band nerd that was all over it. Pros: takes a subclass theme and explores it even further with 2 styles and multiple backgrounds. There's a lot involved here that goes well above just giving me one subclass, which is what I thought this was going to do. Pros: a dozen magical instruments. I absolutely loved all the magic items, and I love that they're not all just, these give you these spell slots. Those Captain America symbols, freaking awesome. Pros: Kobold drummers and engineering core. Very cool idea that we got an extra little mini dungeon and a new faction, and that they're kobolds that drum. I think that's awesome. Cons: none. I got nothing. Lately, I've reviewed several really, really great products that I have really no complaints about. I'm not even going to try to squeeze any complaints out of this one because I have really, honestly, nothing bad to say. The verdict, thus: with multiple subclasses, backgrounds, magic items, NPCs, and even a mini dungeon all working in concert with the theme, the Bard College of Percussion should be the player class supplement by which all others are judged. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson, and you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.